Welcome back to Switch to Linux. So I have found another little gully down here at this park where it's a little windy of a day, but I think we should be fine here. It's like a nice little wooded cubby right here, kind of cool place. We're going to continue on looking at the next chapter in The Power of Focus, and this is on the confidence factor. And the confidence factor, of course, is talking about the confidence. You know, how many things do we do or fail to do because we don't feel like we have enough confidence in ourselves? Obviously, we all feel some fear. And the first thing as I was reading through this, where they start talking about the fear and understanding that there are challenges that we all have, and the best thing we can do is step right into that fear, because once you step through that fear, immediately everything becomes easier. And there's a book out there, and I forgot to look up the author of it, but I will try and remember to link it down here in the bottom. And it is a book called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. And what I liked about that book is it was one of the best books I've read on looking at the concept of we all experience some degree of fear where we are, and what we need to do is feel what that fear is, understand that it's fear that's trying to get in our way, and then step right beyond it into the thing that we are a little uncomfortable in doing. And some great piece of advice that someone once gave me was that if everything, anything that is difficult to do is going to be worth it, otherwise everyone would do it. Or maybe it was everything that was worth doing is difficult to do, otherwise everybody would be doing it. And actually it was this week, I think there was a video by Louis Rossmann where he kind of talked about a little bit about the same thing. I want to say it was one of his conversations on wage and things like that. And, he said a lot of people criticized him for dropping out of college or not going to college and doing all the business stuff and taking free internships. He said people criticized him for that, but now where he's at, he's just about to the point where at 34 he can almost retire. He's I think he's like 27, 28 now, I think. But he said he's on track to be able to probably retire by the time he's 34. And now people criticize him for, the wealth and all this. It's like, what do you want? Do you want me to follow the good person path of let's go to high school and then finish high school and then go off to college? Let's not forget the sheer amounts of debt that we get doing that. And then we have, currently the statistics are 19% of people who finish college actually get a sustainable job. That's not a job in their field. That's a sustainable job. Now, I can walk downtown here in State College area and I can find that about everyone's hiring for $8, $9 an hour. And it's not a sustainable income. And raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour isn't going to help either, because that's going to shoot up the cost of living even higher. And cost of living in this town is already too high. So you have a lot of those factors, but the thing that prevents most of us from moving on into those goals that we have is that confidence factor. And that's what this chapter is about. He's talking about just understanding that we have a lot of challenges in our life where we're not pushing through the boundaries because of fear. And so reading that book called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway is a great thing. I used to have a copy. I don't anymore. And I don't know, maybe I'll try and track down a copy and read it. And I don't know, maybe that might be the next book we could cover. But it's a fascinating book, one of my favorites. I lent it to somebody, didn't get it back, but I can probably find it pretty quickly online or anywhere else. They're talking here about various things. Let's see, what is this one? Unfinished business describes all the mess in your life that you haven't dealt with. All right. So he's talking about ways we deal with unfinished business. The first way, they said, is we play the denial game. How many times do we sit there and deny that a problem exists? I'm going to deny all of these things that are on my table. Second is we can go into limbo. And this is where, if I'm not careful, I fall into the limbo mode. I don't ever deny the problem. I struggle from this one the most, which is falling into limbo. This is like, okay, there's 150 things that I really would like to accomplish, and there's so many things I'm gonna get paralyzed into not doing the right thing. And so what ends up happening is you sit there and you watch videos after videos after videos, or something else to waste more time. But it's time that you could have identified it, and this is why the next potential book candidate might be to go through First Things First again, because it does a really good job of organizing things, especially as I'm doing my web design stuff, working on the Switch to Linux channel. I'm getting ready to launch the cooking channel, which hopefully should be this week-ish. Is kind of what my target goal is. I have 3 videos done. At least one of them, maybe 2 of them are publicly facing on Patreon. I totally forget which ones are public and which ones are not, but the videos are posted on Patreon. But basically, prevent from going into limbo. And the third is we can confront the issue head on. This is kind of like, for me, it's like, there's a thing out there called the Rubin Hill, Minnesota plot, which looked at parenting styles and the outcomes in your children. And it identified 2 basic metrics, placing them on a Cartesian coordinate system, quadrant 1, 2, 3, and 4. And you had the expression of love in the family and the enforcement of rules in the family. And they identified these into 4 quadrants. Some families are high on love and low on rules. Some families are high on rules and low on love. Some families are low on love, low on rules. And some families are high on love, high on rules. And we naturally do not tend toward the best place we can be is high in love and high in rules. A quadrant 1, if you were plotting it out that way, person. But our human nature does not allow us to move in those areas. We will fall into one of the other categories. And I can fall into the more what would be called the enabling category easier than I could fall into the rules-based category. The really negligent parents fall into the low love, low rules category. They're just like, oh, whatever. As long as you're not bothering me, whatever. And that's kind of the thing. Well, the confidence in how we deal with our problems, we will tend to either deny a problem exists or go into limbo as our basic default. But we have to work hard to do the proper response, which is confronting the issue head on. And so that's what they're talking into it. And that's where they say here, step into your fear. And that's the thing that made me think of that book, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. And so looking at that particular book, you can have a look there. And then they go into talking about some of the most common fears, and then they give you some strategic plans. So if you have poor health, take some time to learn about good health habits, exercise, nutrition, and maybe a little bit of examination of your genetics. And I agree with Stephen Covey's principle here where he says we fall into, especially since, I was in college when they were working on the Human Genome Project, and it's either I think it's the Nature magazine fold-out. I still have the full Nature magazine fold-out with the human genome in it once it was published. And right around that time, we were like, everything's in our genes. And it was in the wisdom of Stephen Covey looking at that stuff at that time and writing down in 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, where he writes in there that, hey, the thing is, he says, the thing is that we have a hard time with what we call determinism. It's in my family, so I can't do this, I can't do that because it's in my genes. And he talked about, determinism from a lot of things. And one of those that we can fall into is genetic determinism, that, oh, it's okay. In fact, I remember back also around that same period of time, I was reading that the first time, there was this MC4 mutation came out, which was a human gene, and it's a regulator of I think it's catecholamine, which is one of the signaling things that when you eat fats and proteins, your stomach lining will release catecholamine. It goes back, triggers a leptin signal in your brain to say, I'm no longer hungry. And that's a problem with eating fat-free stuff, is it fails to trigger the signaling to your brain that you're not hungry. That's why we overeat, because we have extracted fat from our foods and we have overdosed it with sugar. Carbs doesn't do that. So this family came out. This was a CNN article from like 2002, 2003, somewhere around there. And this family made these entire T-shirts, made that they were very obese family. Like, it's not our fault, it's our genes. And because they genetically they had the problem with this MC4 mutation. Well, the problem is that does not make you fat. That tells your brain to stop. That you're no longer hungry. And that's one of those things that they utilized the concept that they had this genetic mutation to justify the reason why they overate. Well, no, you just have to take a little bit more stance. Like, I have a good friend who diabetes runs in his family. Well, he doesn't have it because realizing that diabetes runs in his family, he hasn't resigned himself to diabetes. He has chosen to take the steps to not get it. By watching more closely what he eats, I can eat a lot more junk and not have to worry about it. He has to really watch what he eats, and he has to exercise a whole lot more than I do because diabetes is not something that is genetically in me to that degree. However, if I fail to do any exercise and if I eat too much junk food, I can easily fall into it. It's just I don't have that genetic disposition based upon a family background. And that's what we're talking about genetic determinism. But if you do have poor health, look into the various things, such as good eating habits and things like that. What about, let's see, failure? Fear of failure is a big one that prevents people from really moving on and doing things. So the spiritual side of you proves there is a bigger plan. God gave you talent, seek it out, surround yourself with winners. Failure is an opportunity to learn. Making mistakes is essential for long-term success. And that's actually another thing probably I would have included a lot more is when you're talking about a sales or a business environment, you have to realize that failures are part of success. You should expect to find 8 or 9 no's before you find 1 or 2 yeses. And you got to plow through those no's to get your business up off the ground. Not everybody's going to realize it, and I remember when I was doing software sales for the company in Texas, one person's like, why wouldn't you want this? It's like, dude, stop trying to convince people that have already told you no. Just go into the next 500 people on your call list. That's kind of where that is. So they actually include an entire section called Forgive and Forget, which is kind of about one of the things about us is that as people is the things that we have done stupid in our life have a way of pulling us down, and we need to get over that. There's another book I read on that topic called Get Out of Your Own Way, where they kind of address that, and I'll try and remember to link all these down in the bottom. And then they finally talk about 6 confidence-building strategies here. And so the first strategy they address is every day remind yourself you did something well. So if you do the Be Alert system that we talked about a couple weeks ago, you can look that over and say, well, I am making some progress. Now, if there's an area that you need to work on, we need to work on that. But at the same time, every day, just remind yourself you did something well. Maybe you just beat your high score in your video game. Well, maybe, unless you're a professional gamer, spend a little less time on the games, but at least remind yourself that you're not a total waste. Or if you're that good at games, figure out how to make an income doing that. There you go. There's an option. Read inspiring biographies or autobiographies, and that's kind of a fun one. I like to keep some biographies around, and reading them is very inspiring. As part of the one book I'm writing right now, I'm reading several biographies and have read several biographies on famous musicians and things. And, I finished Ozzy's biography. I did Lecrae's. I did Marilyn Manson's, which was a little disturbing. John Dinsmore. I've read all these deep biographies, and it really brings you in a connection. It gives you an understanding and appreciation that things didn't just fall in these people's laps. They worked hard. They busted it. All right. Being thankful is a good key factor. Remembering that your circumstances are not all horrible. There are good things in our circumstances. And then number 4 is tying into last week's, build excellent support around you. Have good relationships and good support structure, which will help you out. And then number 5, push yourself to accomplish short-term goals. This is something you can do, actually. If you look at the Dave Ramsey's plan to get out of debt, he has you list your debt smallest to largest and throw as much money at the smallest one. Why not the higher interest rate? Because it's not about math anyway. If it were about math, you wouldn't have been in debt to begin with. Okay, but by knocking out those smaller loans, you see the accomplishment, and the accomplishment builds you more of this self-confidence to build you on. You pay off your little debt, you look at it and you go, wow, I paid off that little debt. That's awesome. Now I have the confidence to move on and pay off bigger ones. And it causes a snowball effect. That's why he calls his plan the debt snowball. But pushing yourself to accomplish short-term goals. You might be dragged down because all you have is these long-term goals, which are great to have, but make sure you have some short-term goals in there as well. Otherwise, you'll sit there dragging things along without actually accomplishing anything. And then number 6 is do something for yourself every week. This is great. For me, I've kind of got to this point where I'm almost to the point where I take some time for myself every day. I have this one client, in fact, it's the same one we had that issue with last week. Every day this week, they've called at like 10 in the morning, and I don't know how many times I've said, you're going to get my answering machine. I do not go into the office until about 2. But I get a good 12 hours of work in. Sometimes, the early bird doesn't always get the worm because the night owl ate it a few hours earlier, all right? I'm going to tell you that. I'll talk about that in more depth later, but, and then they give us, three steps. What do you do if you hit a slump? Well, recognize that you're in a slump. There's the first thing. We all go through highs and lows, we go through times when we know we're supposed to do things, but we're not always doing them. That's okay. Just start by recognizing you're in a slump. And then remind yourself of some major accomplishments. Maybe it's like, hey, I didn't get a chance to get the exercise in that I wanted to, but look at all these other projects I did instead. Well, maybe we need to focus a little bit more on the exercise, a little bit less on the projects. But the only way you should beat yourself up over this, and even that not much, is if you've really wasted all that time. If you've wasted the time, don't beat yourself up. Just correct the behavior and move on. And then, of course, get back to the basics. Go back to your strategy and your plan, and that will help you build up the confidence. So that is that step. Next is ask for what you want. So with that, I hope that this has been helpful. And I hope that you enjoy this lovely green scenery out here and this outdoor philosophy. And I hope that you enjoy switching to Linux.